Hello and welcome to the Small Town Pastor Podcast. This is Ben Beckner. Thank you so much for listening and joining me on this journey.
Well, hello everyone. Man, it's been too long. And, you know, with a lot of things, we tend to have a desire to have some consistency and regularity to our lives and what we're doing. And sometimes things kind of fall to the wayside. And that's kind of been one of those things with this podcast. It's not that I haven't wanted to do it. It's not that it's not that it hasn't been fun or anything like that, but man, sometimes life just happens in such a way that that it's hard to stay up on some of these things. And so this podcast has been one of those that has kind of fallen by the wayside in a number of ways. And so I just try to do it every so often and kind of give an update. And the purpose of me trying to do this has always been to kind of journal or even evaluate some of the things that are happening in my life and ministry. You know, almost 2 years ago, over 2 years ago, actually almost 3 years ago, I began this process of transitioning out of student ministry into a lead pastor position. And this has been one of the single most difficult things I've ever done, and probably one of the most rewarding things at the same time. And so trying to navigate my way through this, trying to pay attention to things and learn things, and man, it's been a lot. And so honestly, I would say this latter part of this year has, I think the toll of a lot of different things has kind of caught up with me. I would say the last several months have been months of kind of a lot of discouragement and maybe, I don't know, just generally struggling. You know, there are times and moments in our lives where things are hard and difficult, and we try to, you know, kind of push through them and navigate through them. But ultimately, sometimes those things get to a point where we have to really address them head on. And so I feel like that's been where I've been in the last few months. As you know, I began this process before COVID started. And when I was, my first day, pastoring this church was the last, I think, Sunday of January. And about 4 weeks later is when we began, lockdowns and things like that from COVID. And so, man, it was, you know, obviously it was kind of a crazy time then. And it was just a steep uphill climb of trying to learn and discover and do new things often. And, man, I'll be honest, it was that point in time, actually, as I look back on it, was kind of a neat time. It was a neat time for my family to come together in a new place and for us to do ministry together. I look back on those times and it was pretty awesome. We were able to, because of the restrictions that we were under, we led our own music, and in fact, in this room right here where I'm at now is where we live streamed church for, I think it was about 3 months. We had this area kind of cleared out. We had a piano or a keyboard, I played guitar, and my wife and daughter sang, and one of my daughters played the keyboard. My other two daughters ran sound and did the media, and I look back on that time and it was pretty neat. And then as we've move from that time to where we find ourselves now, that's been kind of a point, I think, finally in these last several months, where I think a lot of different things have caught up with me. I found myself, I guess in a season where I felt discouraged and trying to understand the reasons why, trying to understand the reasons I felt depleted. I've hesitated to use burned out because I don't think I'm burned out. I catch now moments of being able to just jump into things and trying and get these things done. And I have a list of things, but at the same time, I also find myself struggling in being able to stay caught up on certain things. I find that the small kind of tedious tasks have been the most difficult to try and stay on top of and do. And so, that's been a bit discouraging. And so trying to, I guess, figure my way through that and trying to discover what I need to do at this point moving forward. I know that oftentimes we need to try to operate and work out of our strengths. And that's a great concept. And I try to do that. But if you are pastoring a small church, if you are pastoring in an area where you've got great volunteers that do a lot of really great things, but they've also got full-time jobs and they've also got commitments and they've also got things that they need to do. You find yourself as the pastor of these small churches doing a lot of things that aren't in your strengths. And I feel like that's probably where I felt a bit burned out and maybe overwhelmed, especially in the last few months. So trying to work through that, I don't know as I've got that figured out, to be perfectly honest. I've found myself in a lot of ways just trying to plow through, just trying to keep fires put out. And I know that that's not healthy or good. And so where do I go? How do I move forward in that? How do I move beyond that? How do I minister and lead and pastor a church and still manage to get all of these things, other things done that need done? And I'm sure if I could find the answer to that question, I could probably get rich off of that. But I don't think that there's an easy or quick answer. And I think that's something we all know and recognize. The problem is, how do we do this in the day-to-day? And so where I'm at and what I've discovered and what I'm trying to do is encourage myself in the Lord. And that's taken on different forms and looked different at different times. These last several months, I've ran across this passage in 1 Samuel, and if I would have thought I was going to share that, I would have had it looked up and read it. But David, in the midst of all kinds of chaos and things going on, in the midst of a lot of things happening in his life and heart, he found himself discouraged. And this passage in 1 Samuel talks about him encouraging himself in the Lord. And when I read that, it just did something in my heart. And so I began asking the Lord, what does that look like and how do I do that? And I think it's what I've discovered is it's a day by day, sometimes moment by moment process that I come before the Lord and confess all of the feelings of frustration, of overwhelming needs, of all of this stuff. Bring that before Him, and then remind myself and fall back on the promises of who He is and what He said He would do. So that's kind of where I found myself in these last few weeks. And I found myself some days just, desperate, for lack of a better word, for the Lord's presence and the Lord's voice in my life. And that has probably been some of the most sweetest and encouraging times that I've had with the Lord in a long time. That hasn't magically cleared everything up. That hasn't taken all of these things that I deal with in the day-to-day and all of these directions that I feel myself pulled. It doesn't diminish those. It doesn't take them away. But it has brought me to a point of realization that I don't have to, and I'm not called to do these things on my own strength. And that why is that our default? When we're faced with hard things, when we're going through things that are hard and difficult, our default response is to just dig in. Our default response is to just work harder, try harder. Why is that? And I think what the Lord is trying to remind me and is teaching me fresh and new is that there is this invitation from Him to fall into His strength, to remember His sovereignty, to recognize His hand in my life and see that in all things and in all ways. And I don't know why my default, I guess I shouldn't speak for everybody. I can speak for myself, that my default is to do things on my own. It seems to be familiar territory. It seems to be something that is something that I have to learn and relearn and be reminded of, kind of go around this mountain several times. I want to get it right. I think we all do. We all want to learn to have our default to turn to the Lord, to find our strength, find our encouragement, find our response in Him. So yeah, I would say that kind of describes the last few months for me of learning to do that. And while it's been hard and difficult, it's also been one of those things that has been a sweet time with the Lord. So as hard and frustrating as things have been, there's been this sweetness and this goodness in who He is and what He's doing. And it's the other part of that is reminding myself of what the Lord has done and the process of me being where I am. And so I would encourage you to do that as well, to remind yourself of the things that God has done and the ways that He has done these things to get you to where you are today. It wasn't a random set of circumstances. It wasn't just the right pieces falling into place. It was His hand the entire time. It was His purposes and plans being carried out, not just in my life, not just in your life, but in all of these things that are in the outside of us. Not only was for me to be where I am and doing what I'm doing, was the Lord directing me in this direction, but He was also directing the hearts of those that had a part in making decisions and in bringing me here. So that amazes me when I think about that. The way that God is able to orchestrate all of those things. He has his hand in not only your story, but in the story of others. And so the process of his story being worked out in my life, it's also being worked out in other people's lives. And all of those things come together in this beautiful symphony, this beautiful symphony of him bringing things together, that as those things do come together, the music that's produced, the story that's being told, the things that are being done, bring honor and glory to him. So as I've kind of struggled in these last few months, I'm also greatly encouraged here recently. Going into this Thanksgiving season and now going into Advent, I'm reminded again of the goodness of God. I'm reminded again of the ways that he is doing things that I'm not always paying attention to. His hand is at work in ways that I'm not anticipating, in ways that that I need without even realizing it. Going into Thanksgiving, the message that I preached that Sunday was looking for and being intentional to find ways to express and show thankfulness to God, to become more and more aware of the things that he's doing. And so that's been a practice that I've been trying to put into place in my life. I would say that I've been pretty quick to give thanks to God when I see something great or miraculous happen in my life. And man, just God, thank you for that. But I'm not so good in expressing and showing thanks. Having an attitude of gratitude in the everyday parts of my life. And I felt pretty convicted about that. How I tend to live in a way that's really kind of focused on me and what I need, and my prayers focused around those things as well, of asking God to do things in my life or answer these certain prayers in the lives of others. But really feeling this conviction of expressing and showing gratitude in the everyday things of my life. And so I've tried to do that. I've been trying to do that more and more, especially as I find myself seeing reasons or experiencing frustrations. When I'm seeing reasons that I can be frustrated or complain, if I find myself complaining, stopping myself in those moments and remembering these reasons why I can be thankful, and taking on this attitude to express gratitude. And that was probably not an epiphany for anybody else, but for me, in some of those moments, this realization that there's a difference between gratitude and thankfulness. And that was significant for me. Realizing that I can be thankful. That's a response. It's an emotion. It's a response to something that is happening or that I see happening. When God is at work in something, I can express thankfulness in that. But having this switch, this attitude that realizes all of these things that God is always at work doing, all of these reasons why I can encourage myself in the Lord, and that see how this is maybe coming back together. Being encouraged in the Lord, encouraging myself in the Lord, comes back to gratitude. If I have that attitude of thankfulness, that attitude of gratitude, sounds like a weird thing. I don't know, getting caught up in the way that this sounds, attitude of gratitude, and how it sounds kind of cliche or whatever, but it's really, really true. how that begins to change my heart and my outlook. In Romans 1, I believe 21, Paul is listing off all of these things that separate us from God. And one of those things in verse 21, he talks about when we are ungrateful, especially towards God, it affects our belief system. It affects our theology of who God is and what he does. And man, that really struck me as well. Because when I'm living in a place of unthankfulness, I have ungratitude in my life. I'm complaining and I'm seeing all these reasons why I can be frustrated and whatever. It affects how I view the Lord. It affects my relationship with him. It affects so many parts of my response to what I see in the world around me. So that's where I've been. And that's why I think too, in some ways I've struggled to do this podcast, because I've just really felt in a lot of ways really frustrated and far from the Lord, and trying to get back to the heart of ministry, trying to get back to the heart of what he's called me to do. And some of that is that realization of the work that he's doing, being able to express gratitude for those things and for his heart towards me, his great love towards me, his desire to see his purposes carried out in my life. And am I willing to submit to those things and go through the things that are hard and difficult, to go through the things that aren't in my strengths, but to carry those things out, to be obedient to those things, because it means that his purposes are being carried out in a much larger picture than what I'm seeing and understanding. So I appreciate you listening or watching this. I don't know. I don't want to make more false promises that I'm going to do this every week, but I know I needed to do it today. Maybe it's an encouragement for you in where you find yourself and the things that are happening in your life. So appreciate it. Thank you for watching, listening. I encourage you to share this podcast, to like and share, subscribe, all those things. So anyway, have a great day. Thanks for listening and joining me on this journey.